Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Payday Superannuation update. And I'm pretty sure you've kept an ear to the ground and you've seen that the legislation has now passed both houses of Parliament. It went through unamended, so we'll talk a little bit about that. And just as a bit of guidance on this session today, we're going to have a more detailed session once the technical requirements have been formalised by the ATO. So this is just going to be fairly high level. We'll skim through, and once the final details come through from the ATO, we'll have another session probably around March next year, just to sort of go through everything in more detail and make sure that you're all ready for the 1st of July 2026. So we'll jump straight in. So we're just going to give you a little bit of an update as to what's actually happening and where we're at. Also, what's changed, because there have been some changes that got through compared to the draft legislation, and all of those are favourable changes from an employer's perspective. We'll look at what's not changed, and we'll just talk about the whole process at a high level. And just our normal disclaimer, we're software developers, we're not your accountants or your payroll advisors or your lawyers. So we're talking mainly about the software context. We will obviously touch on things more broadly, but we won't deep dive into things that you'd be better getting that advice from people that specialise in those areas. So hopefully that all makes sense. And as I said, the technical details haven't been finalised. The ATO's having a session with software developers in early December. We're pretty sure we know what those changes are, but we just don't want to sort of talk about that detail until it's actually crystallised, and we've had a chance to have a bit of a Q&A with the ATO as well. So it is possible, if you are watching this clip's being recorded on the 7th of November 2025. So if you're watching this in 12 months' time, some information that we're talking about today may have changed. So just make sure that you do, and we'll in our future sessions, etc., and our FAQs, we will sort of point out the things that have changed along the journey, just to make sure that you do get the current information as it pertains to Sybiz Visipay and Payday Super. And while we have you, there's another thing that's come up onto the radar screen, and that is something that's been called the SSID, and it's a registration process. So essentially, there's two main ways of, and this is, I should just point out, related to STP, single touch payroll. So from a single touch payroll perspective, there's two main ways of sending the data to the ATO. Software can have a direct link, or you can use a sending service provider, and Sybiz is using the sending service provider model. So up until now, employers that have used the sending service provider haven't had to have a what's called a SSID, and that is going to be issued at some point in time prior to the 1st of July 2026, although big asterisk there. As an industry, we think the timing is a little bit stupid, so we are pushing back to the ATO just to sort of say, look, can we just delay this a little bit, because we've got Payday Super, which is going to be stressful enough. We don't want to add another component into the mix at that same point in time, because it could, if people don't do what's required when required, they're not going to be able to successfully launch their STP, and they'll be chasing their tails and forget all about the Payday Super and get smacked on the knuckles on day one of the new Payday Super. So this is just a heads up at this point in time. More information will be published, but essentially it is a little bit of a cumbersome process where you'll be issued with the SSID, and then you will need to register that SSID to the ATO through the Access Manager, which is a fairly archaic system. It's not as user-friendly as some of their newer user interfaces. We'll give you that guidance as we get closer to that time. But as I said, we are going to seek to delay this process, and it's clear with Payday Super there's going to be enough to worry about. So hopefully sanity will prevail. But at the end of the day, the decisions aren't ours, and certainly with Payday Super, one thing that has become quite clear is that even though the software industry did lobby for certain things to be taken into consideration. We were effectively ignored. Obviously, the clout that the massive super funds have got was a lot more interesting to Canberra's ears than the software development community. So, but we are hoping we'll get a bit of leeway on this SSID process. So, a little bit more about it. It does just formalise the relationship between your ABN, Sybiz Visipay, and your sending service provider. So if you are having multiple companies, if you're running multiple companies under your Sybiz Visipay license, so multiple companies means multiple ABNs, you will need multiple SSIDs, and you'll need to register those individually for each individual ABN. So yeah, we'll obviously have more detail when it becomes more relevant, but just a heads up that is on the radar screen. So the two bits of legislation passed the other day on the 4th of November. So there were some proposed amendments, and the coalition actually proposed an amendment that sort of put the government on notice that the software industry did say we wanted 18 months from the passing of legislation at least to get ready for the change. So we're under the pump, but the good news from our perspective at Sybiz and with SuperChoice, our sending service provider, is that we're pretty confident we've got all the building blocks in place once we get the STP changes rolled in. So from our perspective, we're not expecting it to be too much of a challenge for us, because we've already got all of the building blocks required. Obviously, there's still a hell of a lot of work to do, but not as much compared to some other organisations. So, so we're really comfortable with where we sit on that. But the devil's in the detail, and we haven't got the detail yet because the ATO isn't giving that to us until early December. So, yeah. So just if you do see in the press, etc., about the software industry, because there's been a bit of coverage about the industry not being happy with the timeframes. From a Sybiz perspective, with SuperChoice, we're very confident we'll be able to squeeze 18 months work into the next 6 or so months. Okay. So the exposure draft, which was released in March, this is just a copy and paste because it's ATO information, so I don't want to change the meaning. So the first 3 bullet points are directly from the horse's mouth. And the big thing, and this was a victory for all and sundry, I think everyone complained about this, where there was this notion of having 7 calendar days for funds to hit employee bank accounts. Sorry, not bank accounts, super fund accounts. And that has now been changed to business days. And I should just mention, you will hear this 7 business days thing quite a bit through the journey. That does not mean you've got 7 business days to then, after payday, to go, okay, now I'm going to start the process of processing super. What you should be looking at is what it says on the box, which is payday superannuation. So you should be in the mindset that you will be paying super as part of that payroll process. So when you pay your employees, you've got one extra task to do now, which will be to pay the super at the same time. So the pay run won't be done until you've completed that. So don't give yourself a couple days because you're already going to be too late. There are also some concessions around new employees starting. So it was previously 21 calendar days. Now you've got 20 business days to dot the I's and cross the T's, and that has also extended through to existing employees moving to new funds as well. So it should be pretty evident with Payday Super that you're really going to need to get your employees on side with this, especially the employees that perhaps aren't that concerned about their super at this point in time. They're going to need to have a bit of an interest and work with you to make sure that you can comply with what you need to comply with. So there are scenarios like you might have an employee that's changed their super fund and haven't told you, and then they've gone off overseas on a trekking holiday and you can't get in touch with them. Those kind of realities are going to come into play, and so we really need to going to educate all of our employees to make sure that they're aware of any changes in their superannuation. Really need to be communicated a lot more rigorously than they were previously. And there has also been some guidance around the penalties, etc. We won't go too much into that because, again, we're software developers. We don't want to tell you about the legal ramifications of not doing what you need to do. And there is quite a good, it's a little bit confusing, but there's a fairly comprehensive outline of the compliance approach that the ATO will be taking. You'll get a copy of these slides, so don't worry about jotting that link down, although you can Google it. Just make sure you get the official ATO source. So that's been quite pleasing, that there is that sort of outward communication, because when we've gone through other changes in the past for SuperStream and STP and STP2, we know that there has been a compliance approach, but it hasn't really been communicated. And indeed, with Super up until now, with the Super Guarantee charge, that has been sort of very inconsistently applied from what we've been able to observe. So that's a positive step there in terms of that communication. And so what it all means in terms of Payday Super for Sybiz Visipay users, there is a new term called qualifying earnings. We'll talk a little bit more about that at the end of the session, because we did go into a bit more detail in the previous session. So you don't have to sit through that again if you're all up to date with what qualifying earnings is all about. And that'll need to be reported through STP2. So in Sybiz Visipay 2510, which is the version that's out at the moment, we do have a flag. It's actually labelled at this point in time ordinary time earnings, but that's going to be changing to qualifying earnings, because qualifying earnings, even though it was originally in the exposure draft, the ATO basically said, oh, that's just going to be something that's going to be pretty much under the hood. But as they've sort of looked at it more technically, they've gone, oh, hang on a minute, this is something, a concept that's going to need to be elevated above ordinary time earnings. So essentially what qualifying earnings is that's the amount on which you're going to be paying super. So if you submit STP and you forget all about your super, and then the ATO comes and taps you on the shoulder and says, hey, you haven't paid the super, they will use that qualifying earnings amount to determine what the super guarantee charge and consequences will be for you. So just on the super guarantee charge, there has been a bit of a softening as to some of the penalties around it, but it is still something to avoid at all costs. So just be aware that it will come into play a lot more. There is a self-reporting regime as well. Again, we're not going into the detail on those things, because from our perspective, we always look at it following the path of least resistance, and that's do the right thing, take Payday Super as it says, and pay the super on payday, and hopefully you won't even need to worry about any of the penalties, etc. And if you're not currently using Sybiz Super, definitely consider it. We're seeing a big uptick in terms of sign-ups to Sybiz Super. You can go onto our website. Because it's a financial services product, it's a PDS, so I'm not going to talk too much about that because we let the PDS do the talking. And so you'll be able to access that if you go onto our website, just or Google Sybiz Super. You'll get that information. We've got a link for it a little bit later on in the presentation. The other change that's happening is the maximum super contribution base is shifting from quarterly to annually, which is a pretty good change, because it is a bit of a tricky thing to keep track of. So having it move to annual makes a lot more sense from a software developer's perspective, and hopefully from an employer's perspective as well. And one thing just to be aware of as well, that because the old way of doing super is that you have until the 28th day of the month following the end of the quarter, you could have a situation where you're not paying your final contributions, or rather the final contributions for 25-26 won't hit your employee super accounts until the 26-27 year. Whereas pretty much all of your contributions for the 26-27 year will actually hit the employees' accounts in that year as well. So when you're looking at things like concessional contribution caps and salary sacrifice arrangements and all those kind of things, you will need to just be mindful of that. And with that as well, you may want to start factoring that into your timing of your final contributions for the current financial year. You may want to actually squeeze them in prior to the 30th of June if that's possible, depending on when your pay runs are and the cut-off dates for final contributions. I think last year the ATO's Small Business Superannuation Clearinghouse, I think they had a cut-off of the 18th of June if you wanted to make sure that the funds were in the employees' super accounts by the 30th of June. You needed to do your submissions through the Small Business Clearinghouse by the 18th of June. So, which is quite funny that going forward we're going to have 7 business days. So just be mindful of that. Be aware of the non-compliance consequences. They are quite hefty and in some respects potentially quite comical in terms of some of the minuscule amounts that will be charged. There is some fairly comprehensive information around that on the ATO's website, or we'd defer to your financial advisors and legal advisors if you want more information on that. And we are soon to release Sybiz Visipay 26, but because we haven't been given the STP2 details yet, we will need to do another release. And we are, as much as possible, going to be targeting that release version will be version 2610. If that changes, we will let you know. But I guess the point that I'm making here is if you get our general release of the software in a month or so and you go on to version 26, that's not going to tick all the boxes as to what's required for the Payday Super world. So just bear in mind that somewhere around sort of the March to May timeframe, there will be a release that you'll need to upgrade to be able to use Payday Super and the updated STP2 reporting. So just put that one in your diary and keep an ear to the ground. And just a little bit about qualifying earnings in the context of Sybiz Visipay. So Sybiz Visipay 26 is soon to be released, and we have the qualifying earnings flag on the pay items. So this was previously, as I said, labelled as OTE. And what we're essentially doing is when you upgrade to the relevant version, we'll look at your pay items, and if you have super applies, we're going to flag that as a qualifying earning. And so in most cases, that'll be 100% correct. But if you do some things like pay super on items that you don't need to, you may want to make some changes there to your pay items. So just it'd be a good time to sort of review your pay items as well. From a comprehensive point of view, you may, once we do get all of the technical detail, it may be some edge cases that may require additional pay items to be set up or additional staff types. Once we get the detail, we'll obviously communicate that as well. So a little bit like STP2 when that came out, it did require new pay items to be set up for most people, but it's just going to be the edge case exceptions which won't apply to every employer that will require or possibly require additional pay items. But yeah, we'll communicate that once we have the information. If you are using their maximum super contribution base, that will be changing from quarterly to annually assessed. So you will need to put a little note in the diary to review the staff types prior to that first pay in 26-27. And as I said, we'll just talk a little bit more about qualifying earnings at the end of today's session. And just a little bit of a scenario-based overview of looking at a couple different payroll scenarios and what their experience will be. So the one on the left is fairly similar to what we do here at Sybiz. So we have a monthly payroll, and we pay in the middle of the month for half a month in arrears, half in advance, and we use Sybiz Super, and we're paying our super on a monthly basis. So we really won't have too much to change apart from just doing the super stuff on payday. Other than that, and obviously the SDP2 changes in the background, we're business as usual. So that's, I guess, one extreme. And then the scenario on the right hand side is an employer that pays weekly. They pay their super currently on a quarterly basis. They use the small business superannuation clearinghouse, and they have some employees that exceed the super contributions base. So everyone needs to review their qualifying earnings flags on their pay items, just to make sure that the defaults that we've set are in keeping with the Payday Super regime. In most cases, that will be the case, but if you're doing something a bit funky, you may need to do something a bit funky with your qualifying earnings flags as well. Yeah, because this particular employer is using the small business clearinghouse, they're going to need to find another mechanism for reporting super and paying super, and there's a link to Sybiz Super. If they're paying weekly, they could be paying super 52 or 53 times a year, up from 4. So there's all those additional touch points that they're going to be having with this data. So all that additional risk coming into their payroll process because of that massive uptick in the frequency. One of the things that a lot of people were lobbying for was that Payday Super would be a monthly frequency at worst, but that unfortunately didn't get the nod. So that was something that was lobbied from multiple different angles. And then the other thing is to manage that transition from the quarterly to annual super contribution base. So that'll mean that you review your staff types prior to doing your first pay in the 2026-27 financial year. And obviously we'll have more information come out as we get closer to that time as to what's actually going to be required there. So as I said, it could be, if you operate like Sybiz operates, it could be a pretty easy thing for you without too much stress. But if you do have that sort of weekly payroll set up, it could be quite a challenge. The other point to make as well is that quite often around the end of the calendar year, the person that normally processes the pays goes on leave, and the boss thinks they're going to be cool to do it, and they often don't get everything right. So if you are in charge of processing pays and you take the leave that you're entitled to, just bear in mind that you may need to really have a good think about the instructions that you leave for the people that process pays when you're away, because they may not be aware that they need to do the Payday Super stuff, and could leave you a few headaches to clean up when you get back from leave. So and again, we'll keep that in our communications rolling out as well, just to help you through that process. In terms of what's not changed, so a lot does remain the same since we last had a session back in September. So the launch date, unfortunately, as I said, the coalition did lobby for an 18-month extension for smaller employees, and also the acknowledgement of the 18-month period that software developers had requested. But that didn't factor into any amendments. It went through unamended. The super guarantee charge has been softened, but it is much more likely to come into play. So if the super's not in the employee's accounts by the 7th business day, then you haven't fulfilled your obligations. And in a lot, there are some exceptions, and again, won't go into too much detail, but at the end of the day, the legislation is basically saying it's the employer's fault. So even if it's not, so if you processed the pays and paid the super and did everything that you needed to do on the payday, but then there was something else that sort of happened downstream, totally outside of your control, that still the employer hasn't done their job, even though effectively they've done what they needed to do and controlled all that they could control. But the legislation says it's the employer's fault, and unless some very exceptional circumstances apply, you'll be liable for the super guarantee charge. So again, that's just another point to emphasize. When you see this 7 business days, that doesn't mean it's 7 business days to get out of the blocks. That's 7 business days to complete the process. So you're wanting to start on payday, just like it says on the label. And so the concept of qualifying earnings, there's still some edge case scenarios that we'll thrash out with the ATO next month. That won't bore you with the details on those because they're very, very rare in terms of their application, but we'll still get the information on those as we go as well. So, but yeah, just you will hear the concept of qualifying earnings. It could well be that the ATO is going to communicate that at a broader level to the community, so employees will hopefully be educated as qualifying earnings. They'll see it on their MyGov. They'll probably be educated by the ATO to the extent to say, okay, well, qualifying earnings multiplied by the super rate should be the amount of super that you're getting. If it's not, jump up and down to your employer. So yes, I guess in that sense, employees are likely to be more, or hopefully more involved in the whole super process as well going forward. Other things that you need to consider, just from a business perspective, cash flow impacts, that's been obviously getting a lot of coverage. We're not the first country in the world to do this. There are other countries that have implemented this. New Zealand's been doing it for a while. So yeah, the Earth will continue spinning. Your pay frequency, if there's no reason for you to have a weekly frequency and you could move to monthly, and obviously there's a lot of detail to go into and agreements and all that sort of jazz, it may be something that you wish to look at in your business. And systems and processes will need to be really tightened up. So when you onboard an employee, there's an onboarding option through the Sybiz Super platform as well, which we covered in our last session. And yeah, you really need to make sure that your employees are buying in to the elevated importance as we move to Payday Super, and that can start. Those conversations can start today. So ahead of Payday Super, you can start getting in the ears of the employees and saying, look, if you make changes to, or even before you make changes, let us know that it's something that you're considering, so we can keep an ear to the ground and make sure that, if you are going to be hiking in the Andes for a month and we can't contact you, we want to be proactive and know that you've changed your super fund before you jumped on the plane. So really start making those moves now. And so it's not just for new employees, it's existing employees when they make their changes as well. Another thing, a lot of payroll people that process pays are part-time people, or they're part-time in the role, so they do other things in the business. Yeah, so once they do their payroll for the week, the month, whatever, they'll then go on to other things and take off their payroll hat. But then if there's something that they need to be aware of, so if a fund rejects a contribution because they can't match it to an employee because the employee has changed funds and haven't let you know, the funds have got 3 business days to let you know about that. So you'll need an ear to the ground to go, okay, well, yep, this contribution's been rejected. I now need to get onto that employee, find out what they've changed, and update things accordingly, and do an ad hoc submission for that contribution, and hopefully it still hits their account within that 7 business day time frame, and the clock doesn't start again. So if a submission gets rejected and you find out on the 3rd business day, the clock's still ticking, so you're 3 business days into that 7 business day time frame. So you really need to jump on that as soon as you get that notification. So yeah, that could be really something to consider in your organisations as to how you're going to deal with that flow of information, particularly if you do have people that are there on a part-time basis. And this extends through to self-managed super funds as well. I think at the moment there's about 14% of self-managed super funds in Australia that haven't done their last year's reporting, which is a bit of a no-no. So, and yeah, certain things can happen in the SMSF space as well. So a fund could all of a sudden be non-complying. So when you go to do the submission through the Sybiz Super platform, that's the only one that I'm familiar with, but if you do it through the Sybiz Super platform, you'll get a warning or an error to say we can't actually send this money on because the ATO said this fund's no longer complying, and therefore you're going to need to turn on a dime and find out where this money's meant to go, or yeah, so there's a lot of these kind of things that will come into play. Sometimes accountants, when they do the annual reports and tax returns, they'll update the electronic service address for some unknown reason, and that can cause a bit of havoc as well. So yes, all of these things to consider. So if you do have employees with self-managed super funds, they really need to be part of that same conversation as to if anything changes, and the self-managed super funds or super funds in general, there is a super fund lookup, so you can, if you have doubts about the status of a self-managed super fund, you can jump on and have a look at the super fund lookup, and that'll give you the information. These things are all in play prior to Payday Super, but because of the time frames that we've got, it's critically important to be on top of them. Okay, so if you listened carefully to the discussion that we did last time, we're pretty much going to repeat that around ordinary time earnings and qualifying earnings, so feel free to disappear. In the next session, we will open it up for questions, but because we don't have the final information yet, there's no point sort of taking questions on things that we perhaps don't know the answer to, because that hasn't been communicated to us. So we will make it more interactive next time. But on with the show. So from an ordinary times earnings perspective, that's something that conceptually remains the same, but it is being elevated in its importance. Ordinary time earnings and qualifying earnings are in most senses the same, previously in most cases the OTE multiplied by the rate would be the superannuation liability, but that's changing to be the qualifying earnings multiplied by the super rate. But because there are some edge cases, which we'll cover on the next slide, there is some quirky little bits as to why we're using qualifying earnings rather than ordinary time earnings. The ATO have published some information. We've given them some feedback. It should be fleshed out a little bit more, especially around the edge cases as to the distinction between ordinary time earnings. We believe they're going to be updating that information to be more qualifying earnings speak as well. Just I guess be used to the terminology, and just bear in mind that this qualifying earnings is a new concept. And so in most cases, as I said, it will be the same as OTE. Sometimes it'll be less, sometimes it'll be more. So it'd be nice if it was just always going to be one way that it would be different. Essentially, there'll be the treatment of say the maximum contribution base. Once that's exceeded, basically the qualifying earnings will cut off at that maximum contribution base. So essentially, even though we haven't seen it sort of written as such and communicated as such, and we hope we will get to the point once all of the information is known that we will be able to say that in all instances, qualifying earnings multiplied by the super rate will be all that we need to worry about. We'll watch this space. Another one of the exceptions is an under 18-year-old person working less than 30 hours per week. So they'll earn OTE, but it won't be deemed qualifying earnings. This will hopefully be under the hood from your perspective, but it's just something to be aware of. So essentially what's going to be happening is the ATO will get us to report the qualifying earnings as part of our STP2 submissions, and if we don't meet the 7 business day requirement and the super guarantee charge gets levied, that is the information that they will use to work out how much what they call the shortfall is, and hit us with the super guarantee charge accordingly and the penalties associated with that. And so basically previously what would happen with the super guarantee charge was it was based on salary and wages, whereas super was essentially based on OTE. SGC was based on salary and wages, but essentially both the employer super guarantee and the super guarantee charge will be based on the qualifying earnings going forward. And just to summarise the difference, the between the two. And I should just point out as well that ordinary time earnings isn't really something that's been formalised in Sybiz previously. And from a STP reporting point of view, even though OTE has been a reporting element of STP2, it's not been mandatory. So essentially, from an STP reporting point of view, you can report the super liability or the OTE or both, and we chose to report the super liability historically, but now we're going to need to report the super liability and qualifying earnings, and then there's a chance that OTE might even be put out to pasture. We'll find out next month from a STP reporting point of view, but that's inconsequential from a Sybiz perspective because we haven't done anything with OTE in the past. So qualifying earnings is being extended to include all commissions. So only certain commissions were included under OTE previously, yeah, so just bear that in mind. That's one of those pay items that you may need to review. So if it's a bonus or commission that didn't attract super previously, when you upgrade to the latest version of Visipay, we won't flag that as QE because you've got super does not apply, but you'll have to review that pay item and go, okay, this is a commission, and based on the new rules from the ATO, it's now super applies, therefore it'll be qualifying earnings as well. And yeah, so there's a little bit more information about the notion of who are employees under the Super Guarantee Act, but we won't go into that detail. We covered that a bit more detail last time, and yeah, so some of those amounts may not be currently treated as OTE in the current regime. And I guess the good news is for many employees, the QE will be the same as their OTE. It's just really these edge cases that will come into play. So if you don't have anyone under 18 and you don't have anyone earning above the maximum contribution base, pretty much it'll be QE will be OTE, with the potential for other exceptions coming into play down the track. And then yeah, this is again just a copy paste from the ATO. The exclusions from qualifying earnings, so payments that are the reversal of salary sacrifice super contribution will be excluded, and then things like, as we covered on the previous slide, the under 18 working less than 30 hours per week, and then the amounts that exceed the maximum contribution base. So yeah, basically I'm not confident to sort of say this definitely at the moment, just because we don't have all of the information, but it's likely that any amounts that would be qualifying earnings, except the fact that the employee is under an exemption certificate. So if that's I guess similar to the maximum contribution base, where if an employee has two jobs and they're earning decent money at one job, such that they're going to hit the maximum contribution base at that first job, and they don't want super taken out at their second job, they can get an exemption certificate. And yeah, so we don't have all the detail as to how that will work at the moment. That's something we'll hopefully clear up with the ATO in our session next month. Quite a few people asked that on the registration process, so so we think it will operate the same as the maximum contribution base, but we just haven't seen that in black and white yet. And that's it for today. So thank you very much for tuning in. And yeah, as I said, at this point in time, we don't really want too many questions coming our way because there's still some unknowns. But yeah, in the new calendar year, we'll have some fairly mature FAQs and links to ATO resources via our website. Obviously, it's a hot button topic, so we'll continue to communicate through our newsletters, etc. But yeah, with that, hopefully you're not too intimidated by Payday Super. It is something that we all do need to take very, very seriously, and operationally as well. There might be some challenges in terms of part-time payroll people, etc. And yeah, so hopefully we'll get ourselves all nice and well prepared for when the 1st of July kicks in next year. So thanks again for your time and have a great weekend.